Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome to your third video of this tutorial series. In this video I'm going to show you how to validate form and set up Postgres database connection. Before I do anything, I'm gonna go to routes.rs file and then update the log. So for on request add a dash, then greater than sign, then a space. For response add less than sign and then dash or hyphen, then a space. And for on failure add dash x dash space. If you don't want, then you don't have to add it. This is just a visual improvement. Anyway, close that file, go to models, user form model. Now we name this struct user form model, which is not correct. Correct name would be sign up form model. Now our sign up form and login form are same, both has email and password. So instead we can name it to auth form. Alright, now let's go to cargo.toml file, then add regex because we will use regex to validate our email. Now we will create a static variable for regex. So import lazy log from std sync and then also import regex from regex. Now declare a static variable and call it email rx, and we need to declare the type, which is lazy log regex, and then create a new lazy log. A lazy log will initialize this variable when it's first accessed. And you can read the documentation, they showed an example. And this takes a closure. So inside this closure, we need to create the value. In our case, it's regex. Now create a new regex. And now I'm going to copy and paste a pattern. If you want, then you can use your own pattern. And then call unwrap. Now import validate from validator. Now we need to derive this struct from validate. So add validate. For email field, add validate macro. We are gonna validate this using regex. Pass regex, and this takes a path, which is this variable. We have to dereference, and then an error message when this validation fails. And then for password, similar to email, we can also add a validate macro. Then we will check if the password is at least 8 characters long. And finally the error message. With that, our validation in place, we can now go to auth.rs. Then first import validate from validator. And also update the name. Remember that we changed the name from user form model to auth form model. Now we also have to update this name. So update here. Now inside post sign up handler function, we're gonna validate auth form model. So call validate on user form, and this function returns a result type. The OK type is unit type and the error type is validation errors. We will use the match statement to pattern match the result type and handle the OK and error cases. So for OK, we don't care about the variable because it returns a unit type. And for error, we get access to validation errors. For now, we will redirect to home page for both cases. So cut this thing, paste inside the OK block and also error block, and get rid of this log. Now don't add any semicolon because we want to return anything that returns from this match statement. Now let's go ahead and log the errors. So let's create a variable, then call toString on this error variable. We are able to call toString because the validation errors type implements display thread. Now add the input tracing, open close curly braces, and then pass the errors. Go to the terminal and run our server. Once it compiles, go to the browser and go to sign up page. Now do not enter anything, leave it empty because this is an invalid email and password. So click on submit button, go back to VS Code, and we can see that the validation error being logged. If you notice closely, then both error messages are separated by a line break. And if we go back to our browser again and this time enter a valid email and click on submit, and now if we check the log, we will get only password validation error. So we will get the validation error for invalid field. Now we have to extract the validation error. So to do that, we will create a submodule and let's call it helpers.rs. Now add this to mod.rs. No need to make it public because we will use this inside handlers module only. Now close mod.rs file. Create a public function. Call it extract error, which takes the input argument of type reference string. Previously you saw the validation error string is separated by a line break. So we can call lines on the input string and then we get sequence of each string. And then we can iterate over the lines, so called for each on lines, and then inside this closure we get access to each line, and each line will look like something like field name and then the error message. For example, like the email and then the colon space and then the validation error. Now we can split the field name and the validation error, so call split once on each line and then pass colon space. Now this function returns a optional type and we only care about the sum type. So now we can use if let and get the sum value. We get a tuple of first string and second string. First string will be the field name and second string the validation error. Now add a curly braces. We saw that we get validation error only for invalid field. So inside these curly braces, we can write logic to check if email or password field exists. But we wanna make this function generic, so we can use it for different types of validation error. Like we could have username or text field in the future. The best way to deal with this using is closure. Add another mutable argument small f, which is of type capital F. Since capital F is not a valid type, so add it to generic and then add a where clause, and then the type will be fn mute, which will take two string arguments. Now inside this curly brace you can call the closure, which is small f, and pass first string and second string. Now the caller will get access to these two strings and write their own logic inside the closure. Now open auth.rs. First get rid of this logging. Create two mutable strings. So email error, which will hold the email validation error, and password error, which will hold the password validation error, and default value will be the empty string. Now we have to import helper submodule. Import helpers and then call that function, then pass the validation error which we converted to string, and the second argument is a closure. First argument of this closure is the field name and the second argument is the error message. Now inside the curly braces, we can write some logic to check if the field name is email, then we will store the validation error to email error. If the field name is password, then we will store the validation error to password error. Now we extracted the validation errors to separate variables. We have to now pass these error messages to the UI so the user can see the error message. Now open templates.rs file. Now we're gonna add some fields to sign up templates. So add public email error, which will be of type reference string, and then password error, which will be again of type reference string. Now we need to add a lifetime to this struct. So add tick A and give that lifetime to both fields. Now when the user enters the email and then click on submit, and if we want to re-render the page, we have to maintain the state of the entered email. So for that, we will pass the email as a field, which is the user's submitted email. Now we can access these fields from inside our HTML templates. Now go back to auth.rs. We can see that this is complaining that missing fields. So the signup handler will render this signup page when the user will open signup for the first time. So we have to set some initial value. So we can set initial value to empty string, because user hasn't entered any email, so there will be no email error or password error. And now the error goes away. Now we are also gonna import HTTP status code. Now go to post signup handler, create a HTML string, instantiate the signup template, call render, and then unwrap. Now inside this struct, first we have to pass the email, which we can get from user_from.email. Then we can pass email error, and finally we can pass password error. And now we have to create a response and pass the HTML string to HTML. You already know that how to do that, there is nothing new in it. Now we are gonna return a response with status code. So return a tuple, then status code, then bad request, and then response, then call into response, and then get rid of the redirect to homepage. Finally, let's go ahead and work on the template engine. So open signup.html file. Now inside this form, which makes a post request on /signup, add a if-else block. Now we can check if the email is empty. If it is empty, then we can cut this input field and paste inside. So this input field will be shown when the user loads this page for the first time, or if the email field is valid. And we have to inject the email value which we pass from the server. So value, and then we add double curly braces to insert any value. You can go to templates.rs and you can check this email will be inserted here. Now for else block, which means the email is invalid, we can add invalid email input field with a label. I'm gonna copy and paste some codes. It shouldn't be difficult to understand. So added another input field with invalid input field class and some animation class, and finally the value which we passed from the server. And after the input field, added a label with the error message. Similar to email, we can also do that for password. Now add another if-else block. Then check if the password is empty, which means this could be a valid password or it loads for the first time. So cut this password input field, paste here. We are not going to keep the password state, so there is no value attribute. For invalid password, we will show invalid input field and the label to show password error. Let's go to our browser and test this. Go to sign up page, click on submit, which will submit invalid email and password. And you can see that we get the invalid input field for email and password, and we also get the email error and password error. Now finally, go to index.html file, then add a link to a JavaScript animation library. Now if we again go back to our browser and go to sign up page, then we submit invalid email and password. Then we get to see some animation for invalid input field. If we add a valid email and submit, then you can see that we get the invalid input field for only password and of course the error message for password. As your app grow, you build more complex UI. You might want to extract some part of UI in a separate component. So we can do this using partial. We will extract our navigation to a separate partial. So inside the templates folder, create a new folder, holy partials. Inside that, create navigation.html file. Now go back to index.html file, then cut the navigation bar, open navigation.html file, paste here. Now what we have to do, we have to link this navigation.html file and our navigation bar will be inserted. So we can use include, then the link to that file. In our case, it's partials/navigation.html file. Now we will set up our database. We will use Postgres database. To interact with the database, we will use a CLI tool named sqlx CLI. This will help us to manage our database. So open your terminal, then install sqlx CLI, type cargo, install sqlx CLI. And you can see it's already installed on my machine. And close the terminal once you're done installing. Now open cargo.toml file, then add these two dependencies, .env and sqlx. And with these features, you can see on the screen to go ahead and add this. .env will be used to read environment variables, and sqlx will be used to query our database. And we can also run migration from inside our app using sqlx. Now stop the server, Ctrl+C. Okay, let me just close everything so you can see. So now create a new file, .env, and you can see it's created. This .env file will be used to store our environment variable during local development. When we will deploy, we will use platform's environment variable. So don't add this file to source control. Now add that file to git ignore. Open .env file. We want to add our database connection string to the .env file. Add this string to your .env. So Postgres is the user, 1234 is the password, and it will be located in localhost. This is our database name, so Axum _to-do. Make sure to use underscore, don't try to use dash or something. Now before we create the database, I want to show you that we don't have any database named Axum to-do. So we can go to the terminal and type psql. They'll list all databases. And you can see we don't have any database named Axum to-do. Now close that and go to your terminal. Then type sqlx database and then create. Now sqlx will create a database using this URL. So the key name has to be database _ URL. So again do that psql and then list all these databases. And you can see that our database has been created. Now close that, don't worry about the user. We will create a user when we deploy. Now let's go ahead and write our first migration. So in the terminal, type sqlx migrate add and then the migration name, and the migration name will be create users table, because this migration will create users table. Hit enter, and then you should see a migrations folder is created at the root of our project, and you can see there is a .sql file is created. Now inside that we are gonna write our schema. Now I'm going to copy and paste this schema. It's not that difficult, but I'm still gonna explain you. The first, we created a CI text extension, then create users table if not exist, and that table will have ID as a primary key and the data type is serial, which will create unique integer value for each row and it will auto increment the value. Now the email, which will be unique and not null, CI text, because we wanna make email case insensitive, and the password, which will be hash and it will be type of byte. And if you notice, all three fields are not null. When we will query using sqlx macro, it will look the table and see if any field doesn't have not null, then it will return as optional type for that field. Now I made a mistake. I added a comma at the end of last field. The commas will be in between each field, not at the end. So don't add any comma at the end of this last line or you will get error. Now open init.rs file and close that SQL file. Now we're gonna establish a database connection and run our migration. Now I'm not going to explain a lot because there is nothing much to explain. It's basically calling some API to establish connection. So I'm going to mostly copy and paste some codes. First at the top, add these imports. And then after the logging, we can add function, which I'm gonna copy and paste. Then I will explain, don't worry. Now I copied and pasted this function, which is a public async function, and call it database connection, which returns PG pool, which is our connection pool, and we will interact with our database using this pool. Inside this function, first added a debug log that we are setting up database connection, then try to access the database URL from environment variable, and it can fail, so we added a expect, and after that added a connection option. Then I added disable statement login, which will stop generating unnecessary logging. After that we are going to connect to the database with timeout duration of 5 seconds and with our connection option that we created above. Once it's connected successfully, we will log that. Once we establish database connection, we can run our migration. Finally, a log that successfully migrated. At the end, return PG pool, and with that the database connection function is done. Now go to main.rs file, and after we set up our logging, we can set up our database connection, and then we have to call await because it returns a future. Now before we run our app, I want to show you our database. I will go to the terminal, then go to our database, Axum to do, and you can see there is no table. Go ahead and run our server, just run. So give it a time, and you can see that we successfully connected to our database and we are also successfully migrated. Now if we go back and check database, now we have the tables. In the next video we will interact with the database and create user. And that's it for this video. Don't forget to watch the next one. If you like this video, then give me a like, and I will see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.